So let's take a quick tour through Lantern and see what all of these tabs are so it's not quite so overwhelming. The first thing you're going to want to do is make your map in Trizbort and then import that, and you can do that at the File menu here. And you can import either a Trizbort file from the Windows executable, or you can import a JSON file. And after you do that, it will ask you to save your project. So no matter what version of Trizbort you are using, you should be able to get your map into Lantern. The next menu over has got a test client here, so you can test your game directly in Lantern. So let me just open up a little game that I happen to be writing, and I can pull this up, and now I can test my game right here. And there's a couple of extra commands that you can type in there that would not work in the like an exported version. You can turn debug on, debug, and that will like dump out variables and show stuff to you. Oh, vars, look, it even shows you the state of your variables. I typed vars there to see what was going on. So you can get some debugging info out of that. And then that thing about cheat, what is that through? That's the walkthrough. So I'll show you that in a second. And then once your game is all done, you can export it out to a variety of platforms. The Color Computer is kind of broken at the moment. This stuff is always kind of in a state of flux. I would say it generally works. Except the PC and the might be a little questionable, and Coco is definitely broken at the moment. However, if you really need that to work, let me know. And then finally, the help. There are things just for working on the various platforms that I always forget. So I've just put stuff over here about, like, I always forget TRS-80 Fred commands or Kermit commands and BBC Micro Disk commands. So that's very useful. Code editor shortcuts. The code editor has lots and lots of shortcuts built in. So generally it's 2 letters plus tab will expand into something else. So if you're used to using Visual Studio, you will love this. So if you want to write an if statement, just type if tab, it will stub out an if statement. If you want to stub out an else statement, else tab, it will stub out an else statement. The properties will autocomplete for you. So if you type like PL tab, that expands to player, and you want to then move the player somewhere else, well, now you got to change the player's holder property. So it's PL tab dot H tab, that'll expand to holder. So there's a separate video on all of that though. So just keep in mind that that Lantern does have a lot of shortcuts built in to speed up the coding. All right, so there's our menus. On our welcome tab right here, this is the directory that the project is going to get dumped out to when you export it. So if you export to Apple II, this would be Steinberg _ Kessel _ Apple II. It's going to create a new folder and dump all the code in there and build it. This is your welcome message, author, version, and this is the output executable name if you are exporting to one of the retro platforms. If you want to throw on a title screen for some of the platforms, you can select that here. There are some utilities for actually creating those. There's a Commodore 64 one and and an Apple II utility in the Lantern folder for doing that. For the Spectrum, I think, what do I use? ZX Paint or something like that. So this is kind of optional here, but it really makes your game look slick if you throw a title screen on there. All right, moving on. Let's go to the next tab, Rooms and Objects. This is everything in your game here over on the left. These are all the objects that have been imported from your map. And if you want to add more, just click the Add Room or Object button, and it will add another object onto your game. You may have, like, imagine you have 2 rooms called Forest. How do you know which one is which? Well, that's shown down here. Down here is the unique identifier for every object within the game, and usually if you have a name collision, you'll see that here. You'll have like Forest 1 and Forest 2, right? So this is the name that you're going to use to refer to your objects inside of your code, because these names are unique, whereas these printed names are not. And here's where you can set all the properties and attributes on an object. So you can connect your objects your rooms up to other rooms. You can put a description on your rooms or objects. The initial description is printed when you see an object. So like the example here is a wooden trunk lies half buried in the mud. That's a better description than there's a wooden trunk here, right? So if you want to have an object described in a particular way when the player first sees it, that would be put there. For rooms, that description is printed the first time you enter the room, and then after that it goes back to the regular description. So you don't, strictly speaking, need initial descriptions. However, it really makes the game feel much less mechanical. It makes the writing much more immersive. And then the parent is where that object is. So let's look at the player here, and you can see that the player here is on the road to the castle. But if I wanted to move the player somewhere else, like to the forest, boom, now the player's in the forest. So that's how that works. When you import your map from Trizbort, you will have to kind of move objects into the containers they're supposed to be in if you have that scenario. So Trizbort does not allow you to, like, say, create a room that contains a box that contains a torch. So what you'd have to do inside of Lantern is go find your, like, here's the lighter. Like, you'd have to go say, okay, well, where's the lighter going to be? Okay, that's going to be in the uniform. Okay, so let's go set that parent property to the uniform. So if inside of Lantern, you will have to put objects inside of their respective containers where they belong, and that's not because Lantern's got a problem. That's just kind of the way Trizbort works. Verbs. There's a ton of built-in verbs. However, you can add your own. So if you wanted to add another verb, you just type it in here and click add. If you wanted that verb to have a synonym, then type in the name of the verb, comma, and then the synonym. And now those two verbs basically map to the same action. Verb checks are constraints that you can put on verbs. So let's look at a particular one here. Let's drop something. So if I'm going to select the verb drop, and you can see here that in order to drop something, I have to have the direct object, or I have to have the first noun, and I have to actually have typed in a second noun. I can't just type drop. I have to type drop something, and that thing that I drop, I have to have it. So generally, you should not have to mess with this very much. I'd say stay out of this. But the purpose of this is to put constraints on verbs. So imagine, like, you're adding your own verb. You add the verb kick right now. But if you want to kick something, then you probably want to say that I have to specify that a first noun, and I have to specify that I see the thing that I'm trying to kick. So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to put rules on verbs that allow the game to decide whether what you're trying to do is invalid or not. And this is all described in other videos about how to add your own verbs. Functions. There are some built-in functions, but this is where you write all the logic that makes your game do what it does. There's videos on writing functions. Functions are the code, right? So here's the code for searching the uniform. I wrote a function called search uniform, and it says if the lighter's in the Luftwaffe uniform, print line, searching the uniform reveals a lighter, and then put the lighter in the player's inventory. Otherwise, print, you find nothing. So that's an example of the code right there. It is basically C. So if you can write in C, you can write in this stuff. It's very similar to C. Actually, it is a subset of C is what it is. So you can make your own functions, and you can also call your own functions using C syntax. All right, sentences. Sentences are where we map verbs. We map specific input the player types to functions to call. So let's look at this one here. This is saying if the verb is open and the first noun is bookcase, then call the open bookcase function. This sentence here is saying if I search the Luftwaffe uniform, so if the verb is search and the first noun is uniform, the Luftwaffe uniform, then call the search uniform function. There is an ability to add wildcards, so I can say if I search anything, print call the find nothing function, which prints find anything. So what Lantern does internally is it tries to find an exact match for your input, and if it can't, then it tries to find a wildcard match, and if it can't find that, then it prints I don't understand. So that's how that works. And you can so you can select your verbs here. So if I want to light, I don't know, the lighter. Let me I think I should be able to type in lighter. Let's try that. L-I. There we go. So if I try to light the lighter, then I could make a function here. to light the lighter. And if I forgot to make the function here, I can just click this button and it'll ask me to make a new function. And I can make a new function, blah, blah, blah. All right, so that's, the functions are the kind of the chunks of code in your game that are unique to your game. And the sentences are mappings of input to those functions. So if the player types something, you call the function to make the response happen. And what you should do is have many possible combinations mapped to the same function. So if I try to, shoot the alien and I try to kill the alien with the gun or the ray gun, those should both map to the same, shoot the alien function. And that way the player doesn't have to play hunt the verb. Events. Events are basically functions that just run every turn. So I've got a function here called move guard. Every time I type in a command successfully, I move, I look, I check inventory, whatever, then the events run. And the events are used for, making NPCs move around the board, or making the checking to see if running countdown timers or count up timers, has the player run out of food, light, has the reactor exploded because it overheated, things like that. We can make code that runs every time the user enters a command to check for the state of the game or modify the state of the game. So we could have an event that says if the player is carrying the 3 things that they needed to find in this quest, now print that they win, right? So that's what events are for. Events are code that run after every user command. You can add your own variables. You will need this for your functions, so you can add your own. Variables are unsigned bytes, so they can have values of 0 to 255. You can also make arrays. This is useful for having NPCs follow paths around the board. There's a video on that. And testing. So if you put a walkthrough in here, you can put all your commands that are north, south, east, west. If you go to the player and you type cheat, it'll pull up the walkthrough, and then and then you can hit enter. So in the player, you can put a lot of commands together separated by commas, and that will allow you to kind of speed run your game and test that it actually works. The review thing I put in here for me as a teacher, so I want to be able to dump out the contents of everything and check for spelling. You can take this, put it in Word, spell check it, and then kind of find the errors. Unfortunately, there's no spell checking built into Lantern yet. Default strings. If you don't like the text that I have put into the game, you can change that here. So if you don't like the I don't follow you text, you can just go in here and say, you could change that to I don't understand, and your game will now print out I don't understand instead of I don't follow you. So that generally you should not have to mess with this. However, this comes in handy if you're, for example, help somebody with a game where the game is told from the point of view of an alien, and you want to hear it as though, you want to hear the parser messages as though the alien were speaking. So you kind of want the almost like, you're listening to Homer Simpson's voice, or you're listening to somebody else's voice. And if you change the parser messages, you can achieve that. So you don't have that split between here's the voice of the protagonist versus here's the very mechanical voice of the engine under the game. So if you need to customize any of these messages, you can. And then finally, external tools. Depending on what kind of platform you are exporting to, you'll probably want to, if you're exporting to Apple, you'll want to set the location of Apple Commander. And I do a lot of stuff moving disk images over on ADT Pro, so I have specified an ADT Pro folder. I have, for Apple II, you can specify a script to run after the build is executed. So what I've done in that is I've put commands to start up Apple Win, and so I can test my game. And there are separate videos on that. So that's the tour right there. We have kind of the the intro to your game, all the rooms and objects and their properties that you can set. You can come in here, edit all your objects. You can add your own verbs. You can put constraints on those verbs. You can write your own functions, which are units of code that do things in your game. You can create sentences, which are commands of input or combinations of input that map to functions or that will result in functions being called. You can make events, which are functions that get called every turn to update the state of your game, check for wins, consume resources, make events happen, make things happen in your game. You know, after turn 20, you know, the pirates board your ship, stuff like that. You can make variables, which are pieces of information used for storing values that are relevant to your game. There are some built-in ones. DOBJ and IOBJ, those are the first noun and the second noun. Score, moves, health, turns without light. So these are all built-in variables. They're there for you to use. I mean, they are there. They're there already, so you don't have to add your own score variable or your own move counter or your own health. That's there. There's some stuff you can add a walkthrough to help you test. You can override the parser messages, and you can set up external tools. So that's the overview of Lantern. And if you go to textadventure.net, you'll see I've just put up gobs and gobs of tutorial videos on how to actually use that. Oh, one other thing, very important thing. I'm glad you stayed around for the entire video. Let's go to functions here. If you right-click on the code editor, there are all sorts of templates that you can drop in. I almost forgot the most important thing. So if you're like, I don't know how to open a door, I don't know how to turn something on, I don't know how to kill an enemy, or I want to do a monster drop, just all you have to do is right-click and select the thing that seems most relevant, and it will drop in a template or a code fragment, and then you can just go in and change the object names or change the exact text. So there's a ton of help for you built in here with writing these functions. And the same thing with events, although events don't generally do as much as functions do, so the options here are just a little bit more limited. So keep that in mind. That's a huge help right there. That will really jumpstart or speed up your development cycle, is when you write your functions. Just take a look here and see what kind of code stubs are available, and try those, and that will save you the head bashing or the head scratching of trying to figure it all out yourself. So that's it. There's the grand tour of Lantern. The next step I'd say is go look through the tutorial videos and see, after importing your map and putting your objects where they need to go, start looking through the tutorial videos and see which ones are relevant to the particular puzzles in your game.